Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of the Big Doug and Carmi Show, your one stop shop for all things Commanders. Usually, this is an opposition Wednesday, but it's the holiday season, so we move things around. So, here on a Friday is John Marks. John, thank you so much for joining me today.
What's going on? How are you?
I'm excited for a little big time football at the end of the year. You guys are usually ready for big time football. Commanders just now getting there. Kind of exciting for a game between two teams with big aspirations.
Yeah, I actually was. It was on my excuse me, my birthday. It was December 19th. I forget the year now, but my wife and I went down to Landover, and the Eagles ended up losing. This was Chip Kelly era, and the Eagles lost, and they finished 10-6 on the season. But that loss, it was the second to last game of the season. That loss knocked them out of the playoffs. So Eagles, listen, the Eagles have had these are NFC East games, and I guess you're unless the Giants right now. Anybody can beat anybody else. Cowboys are having a down year this year too, but yeah, man. I mean, I'm expecting a very competitive game come Sunday.
Let's see. Where does this team rank roster wise with some of the other Eagles teams?
Oh wow, top to bottom, offense, all three layers of the offense, offensive line, running back, skill, quarterback. Same thing with the defense line, linebackers, secondary. It's as well balanced a team as I've ever seen. 2017, they won the Super Bowl. This is a better roster than 2017. And you know what, Doug? A lot of times it doesn't matter who has the better roster, who has the better talent. It's who plays better as a cohesive unit, or is the team unified, pulling in one direction? Is there internal stuff going on like we saw with the Eagles last year? And again, this team is very much united, and everybody's pulling in the same direction.
I'm curious, you mentioned the team from last year, Brian Johnson on the staff here now in Washington. What was it that happened last year that just didn't work out for him there?
Man, they were 10-1, and the 49ers game happened. And after the 49ers game, Nick Bosa said, "Hey, I'm going to give the Cowboys." I think the Eagles had the Cowboys the following week. He said, I'm going to give the Cowboys the blueprint for how you beat this team, and it's you pressure Jalen Hurts up the middle. You don't allow him to escape up the middle, and he's going to look at the pass rush. He's not going to look down the field. He's going to look at the pass rush, and that's what happened after that game. Team started blitzing Jalen Hurts, and he was seeing ghosts. He was not seeing the field, and then I mean, I don't know if you can blame or how much you can blame Brian Johnson for it. Nick Sirianni was getting involved, and then he wasn't involved, and then he was involved, and like nobody knew whose offense they were really running. But it's got to be when you go from 10-1, Doug, and you're the favorites to go back to the Super Bowl from the NFC, and you end up not winning the division and losing to the Buccaneers in the first round of the playoffs, getting blown out. It's more than the X's and O's. It's the Jimmies and the Joes, and there was stuff going on inside that locker room. So that's what I would say the biggest thing was that once an NFL defense or a defensive coordinator says, "Hey, we figured you out," it's a chess match. Now, what can they do to counter that move? And the Eagles didn't have an answer last year.
I don't think I've seen anything quite like what happened there last year. Where are you on Sirianni? I mean, it feels like, to your point from the end of last year to where we are now, the way people view him maybe has changed. Where are you with Sirianni as the coach? Because I thought maybe there'd be shakeup coming, right?
I'm quickly googling. I think they were 2-2 to start the season, and after what happened last year, and they considered moving on from Sirianni. And I think when they met with him after the season, he presented like, "Hey, here's how I'm going to fix it. You bring in Vic Fangio, a longtime defensive coordinator. You bring in Kellen Moore, who has expertise and experience calling plays, and you pitch yourself as more of the CEO type that's going to oversee everything." But still, it's like, okay, you're keeping your job, but now you got to win. And they started the season, they lose to Atlanta, and that's the game that Saquon Barkley dropped a fourth down pass that he could have walked into the end zone. That would have given him a win. So they beat the Packers. They lose to the Falcons. They're going down to New Orleans to play the Saints, and they're 1-1. I remember being on the air saying, "Man, if they fall to 1-2 and they lose this game, this is trouble for Nick Sirianni." So they win that game. Then they go down to Tampa Bay and they get blown out by the Buccaneers. So now they're 2-2. And it's like, uh-oh, this is trouble. They had their bye week. They haven't lost the game since. So it very much felt like at that bye week at 2-2 that Sirianni was coaching for his job. And they haven't lost the game since. So Sirianni, Doug, it seems like Sirianni, when they're winning games, everybody just doesn't pay attention to Sirianni. Once they lose a game, it's like, oh, it's him. He's the guy that's losing it. He's responsible, right? So it's a tough situation to be in, but they haven't lost the game. So I think that says what you need to know about Nick Sirianni.
It feels like no coach spends more time on the hot seat winning football games than Sirianni does, and I get why, but it's just I'm sure it's frustrating for him. From the outside, the Big Dom thing is kind of interesting from those closer to the organization. Who is Big Dom and what does he do?
So Big Dom is I would call him the fixer.
Yes,
Right. Long
okay.
time. Look, there was a long time Butchie Pacenico, who was the long time. He was kind of, I'm going to say the head of security, but he was a former Philly cop that had connections all over the city. So if something was going on, then you call him first, right? So he was kind of in charge of head of security. He would ride with Andy Reid. When he retired, Big Dom, who was already on the staff, he kind of slid into that position. So he's former law enforcement. He's South Philly. He's South Jersey. So he has connections all over the place, and he's like he's the fixer. And if anything goes wrong or if anybody needs anything, Big Dom is the guy you call. Now, he's very public now, and he almost has like a coaching duty. He's on the sideline, like to
Right.
get in between Nick Sirianni and the defensive line coach that's yelling at Nick Sirianni. Doug, I don't know if any of this stuff works in any other city in any other year, but Nick Sirianni, who's like a hothead and he's yelling at our fans and he's fighting with players, and Big Dom is on the sidelines, and I don't know how it works, but it works, and it's working this year. But yeah, Big Dom just adds to this entire Eagles thing, which is very odd.
He reminds me a little bit that I'm a huge Commanders and the Georgia Bulldogs, which makes me sad for all of them that were at the Eagles now. Kirby's got a guy that holds him by the back of the pants so he doesn't run
Yes.
onto the field too much. Big Dom always kind of makes me feel like the guy that kind of keeps Kirby from running onto the field. We're going to get to some of those Bulldogs in a minute. Vic Fangio, you mentioned earlier, comes in. Maybe it's less is more is what he's brought to the team. I mean, obviously that defense is loaded, but they didn't add that many more pieces this year. It just feels like he's got them going in a different direction.
Yeah, when Jim Schwartz was hired, when he actually got hired before Doug Peterson. So the Eagles hired Jim Schwartz to be the defensive coordinator. He was taking over for a fella named Billy Davis, and that was a Chip Kelly hire, who best case scenario was a college linebacker coach, and I think that's what he actually ended up doing later on. But the first thing you noticed with Jim Schwartz was, all right, like that's a professional defensive coordinator. He knows how to adjust in games. He knows how to look at his roster and say, this is what I should be doing, even if maybe I haven't ran this exact style of defense. So he was basically looking at his roster and saying, like, all right, well, here's what I'm going to do now. Vic Fangio comes in with that same type of experience and guys that they've had before as defensive coordinators. So Jonathan Gannon, who was on the team that went to the Super Bowl, he is a Fangio disciple. So the organization decided they were going to run this Vic Fangio defense, even if Vic Fangio wasn't the defensive coordinator. And they were trying to get him, but it just wasn't working out. So they ran his style of defense. And his style of defense is, we're going to play the safeties back. We're going to let you throw everything underneath. We're going to make you go 13, 14 plays. You're not going to make big plays on our defense. And we believe that you're going to throw an interception, or we're going to get a sack and a strip sack, or whatever, or we'll hold you to a field goal. So last year, Sean Desai was the defensive coordinator. He was another Fangio disciple. He got fired because he struggled. So they actually got Vic Fangio. But with all that being said, I don't care how good of a defensive coordinator you are, unless you have the players. Well, you can have a great scheme all you want. And what you've seen from this Eagles defense this year is their younger players on the defensive line, particularly Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith. And then their 2 draft picks from this draft, rookies, and Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean have made immediate impacts. So, and Zach Bond was a free agent signing a 1-year deal from the Saints. He had been kind of a part-time starter down in New Orleans. He's been one of the best players on their team. And then the
Wow.
Kobe Dean's taking that next step. So, I mean, Doug, listen, at the beginning of the season, I would have told you, all right, listen, this defense, based on what we saw last year, and they're getting a little bit older and they have some younger players, if they're middle of the road, but they can create some turnovers, then I'll be okay with that. And they might be good enough to win. I was not expecting a number one defense in the league. I don't think anybody in this city was.
What was it? There was a couple things I'm curious. Nolan Smith, you mentioned, who I thought was a steal at the time. He just needed to put on some weight. What took him just getting used to it? Because I thought I thought he'd have a faster impact in the league than maybe he did.
Yeah, I was wondering if if he was going to be a bust after year one. So Jeremiah Trotter was in Washington for a couple seasons, and he was a
Yep.
really good player.
Yep.
His rookie year, he was drafted one of the first picks in the third round. His rookie year, he wasn't even active until like the last 2 games of the season, where season was over and they started putting him out there. The second season he came out and he established himself as a Pro Bowl linebacker. And Nolan Smith has taken a lot of that track. Like, he is undersized. I don't know how much more weight he's put on. Maybe a little bit. He's still 240 to be a defensive end, which is still kind of light.
Crazy.
But like, he is, yeah, like, whatever happened happened. I don't know if it was just when you have that whole thing where you go from, and he was an Alabama player. Yeah. So
Georgia.
so so he's a
He's
no,
a Georgia
Georgia,
guy.
Georgia, right.
Yeah.
So they're deep into the playoffs. He's playing into January, and then right away you go into the draft process, and then you're drafted, and then it's mini camp. You move to Philly, training camp. That's a really, really long season. He didn't really have a break from his previous college year. So I think sometimes that also plays into it. But you saw immediate impact from him this year. Nolan Smith has been absolutely fabulous.
Nakobe Dean is another one of those guys that took a little bit longer to get going. I think maybe if I recall correctly, he had a little bit of injury stuff going on last year, but this year he looks like the guy that I thought was going to go in the first round. That last year at Georgia, I think now you're starting to see who Nakobe Dean really is. He's fantastic when healthy.
Yeah, has not been able to stay healthy as a pro until this year. And
Yeah,
you cross your fingers, but he really hasn't. And he hasn't been able to show, because he really hadn't even been, well, he's been great, but he can't stay healthy. You really hadn't seen anything from him. He hadn't flashed. He looked small. He wasn't making those plays that you saw him make at Georgia. And I think this is where you can give Vic Fangio a lot of credit. He said, all right, you're going to play downhill, because that's what your strength is. Play downhill. Like, go towards the linebacker. Go towards the line. We're gonna blitz you in the A gap. We're gonna blitz you in the B gap. And when you have big bodies like a Jordan Davis, former first round draft pick, monster 360, 380, Jalen Carter, who takes on two, 3 players at a time, that opens up space. And then you know what Nakobe Dean does? He's able to make plays, and he's
yeah.
not missing tackles. He's been really, really good.
Jalen Carter's on track to be one of the best players in the league in my mind within the next couple of years. You can hear about it. You're seeing it. How impressed have you been by Jalen Carter?
Man, people talked about him being top of the draft talent, and he slid for the off the field stuff. And there was a lot of stuff that was out there that he wasn't coachable, that the coaches didn't like him, they didn't listen. How much of that is true, or how much that was put out there to kind of hurt him? I don't know. But when you talk about just raw athletic ability, powerful, 2 guys can't even deal with him. So interior defensive lineman, if you're looking for sack numbers, then you're not really looking at the right stat, because he controls that game from the tackle position. They're so worried about what he's doing. He's getting double teamed on almost every play, against the run, against the pass. He's constantly pressuring the quarterback up the middle. And he's almost single-handedly changed the defense from what you saw last year. He is an unbelievable player.
You mentioned the 2 corners. I thought maybe with Cooper DeJean, I mean, I think Quinyon Mitchell was a guarantee. As much as draft picks can be guarantees, how surprised have you been by just how good he's been in year one?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, making an impact as a rookie, even as a first round draft pick, and I can just tell you what people said about when they drafted Mitchell, which was like, oh well, like why would you take the guy from Toledo when you had other players who were on the board, like the Terry Arnold that was on the
Yeah,
board. It's like, well, why would you take him? And it's like, well, this is why you take him because
very
he's
good.
this good. He really, really is. And I love the mentality. Doesn't say a whole lot. They've had cameras on him where he's following the wide receivers around, and he's like a very undercover bleep talker where he's just
Yeah.
shadowing these wide receivers and he's telling them, "You're not getting anything today. You're not getting anything today." And then Cooper DeJean, he didn't really play the first couple games of the season, and you wondered if it was like, all right, like trouble transitioning from Iowa to the National Football League, speed of the game, like is it affecting or whatever. And then right after that, it was pretty much the bye week, like with the rest of the team. They started putting him in the slot, and man, he's like a Swiss Army knife. He's always around the ball. He's a sure tackler. He made a tackle on a fourth down against the Bengals where they're driving. And if they go down, they score a touchdown. Now it becomes a one-score game. And one-on-one, Jamar Chase has the catch. He needs to get 2 yards for the first down, and DeJean just put him down. No conversion, Eagles ball, they go down and score a touchdown and the game's over. So you've seen him a couple times now this year make big plays like that. So they have some really, really good young pieces in the secondary.
Jalen Hurts, overrated or underrated?
I'm it's I did sports radio in this town for 20 years, and the two toughest professions in Philadelphia sports is the head coach of the Eagles and the quarterback of the Eagles. Donovan McNabb. It was nonstop Donovan McNabb talk. Carson Wentz, even when he was good, Carson Wentz talk. Andy Reid, Doug Peterson, now Nick Sirianni, Chip Kelly. I mean, like when I watch him play, am I overly impressed with his passing ability? No, no, I'm not. Am I overly impressed with him as a raw, natural quarterback? No, but he manages the game. And here's what I think the important thing is when they need a first down, when they need a drive in the fourth quarter, when they need something big, he always seems to get it done. And in 2022, when the conversation all offseason was, is he a good enough quarterback? Is he a good enough passer? Can he actually be the Eagles franchise quarterback? And he progressed as a passer. He really did. In the Super Bowl, he outplayed Pat Mahomes. I mean, geez, they came that close to winning the Super Bowl. He's kind of went backwards as a passer since then, especially when you look at the weapons that he has on offense. But the way they've built this team and the way that Eagles GM Howie Roseman built the team in the offseason was how do we get Jalen Hurts being the Jalen Hurts we saw in 2022? And while he hasn't done that as a passer this season, running the football is so important to Jalen Hurts when he's the quarterback. You can't rely on him dropping back 40 to 45 times a game. He's
Right.
never going to be successful doing that. So as long as this is the formula and he's able to throw the ball when they need him to throw the ball, like Lamar Jackson is an MVP, perennial MVP candidate every year. But when you reach the playoffs, the good defensive coordinators say you're not going to beat us with your legs. You're going to have to beat us with your arms, and he hasn't been able to do that yet. Jalen Hurts has showed in the playoffs he can do that because they're going to keep making him do that. So far, so good. We'll see what happens in the playoffs this year.
Were you surprised that they were able to get Saquon Barkley? And have you been surprised at just how dynamic he's been?
I'm not surprised that he's been excellent. I'm surprised that he's been this good.
Right.
I expected a good version of Saquon Barkley coming from New York, dealing with bad offensive lines, a bad organization, bad coaching, bad quarterback play, no skill guys around you. And then you go to the Eagles, great offensive line, great skill guys around him. Jalen Hurts is a dual threat, and that helps the running back as well because he can always keep it and run. I didn't expect a potential 2,000 yard season. And was I surprised they got him? I was not because Howie Roseman and the Eagles could have said, hey, we'd like Saquon Barkley, but running backs don't get paid. So we're going to wait around a little bit. And if there's not a big market for him, we'll try to sneak in. That's not what they did. From the onset of free agency or whenever the whenever everything opened up, the tampering period, they were aggressive and went out and got him because Houston was interested. There were a couple of other teams that were interested, and it's not like they paid a lot of money. It was $20 million guaranteed or 20-some million
Yeah.
guaranteed. Like, for example, Gabe Davis got more guaranteed money than with the Jaguars. Gabe Davis, because you pay wide receivers now than Saquon Barkley. Imagine the impact that Saquon Barkley is having on this team and Gabe Davis, right? So the Eagles said, hey, we value the running back. We're going to go out. We're going to pay him. The window to win is right now for this team. So let's go out and get Saquon Barkley and look at the dividends. It's amazing. Really is.
If Dan Quinn came up to you, John, and said, "Hey, what's the key to beating this Eagles team?" You say to him, "What?"
That's a great question. I still make Jalen Hurts beat you with his arm.
Yeah.
I don't, because Jalen was really good in 2022 with throwing deep balls and throwing 50-50 balls, and he's been gun shy with it. He had turnover issues earlier in the season. So if you go out and you go back and look at the games, and even watching in real time, you'll notice that he'll have potential plays down the field that he doesn't take, that he doesn't make.
Right.
Because I think he's worried about throwing interceptions. With a guy like A.J. Brown and even Devontae Smith, we saw this last year and the year before, throw the ball up and let your guys make a play. He hasn't been willing to do that as much. So the deep ball hasn't been there. I challenge him. I challenge him to throw the ball in between the hash marks. I don't let Saquon Barkley beat us, and I don't let Jalen Hurts beat us. Doug, you'll remember this because you're at least as old as me, if not older. But the Redskins against Randall Cunningham, it's either the late 80s or the early 90s. They played a 6 linebacker defense against Randall.
Yeah.
And they said, you are not going to run and beat us. And Randall didn't know what the hell to do. And did Jim McMahon end up coming in that game? But like Randall and those Eagles teams didn't have success because in the playoffs, they were able to shut down Randall. I would do the same thing to Jalen Hurts. He's going to beat you. He's going to beat you with his runs, and you can't let him get third and short because you know what happens. The annoying tush push. It's almost an automatic first down.
You have to give Saquon some credit because maybe he is, but it doesn't feel like he's complaining, and he's got to be 5-6 touchdowns short this year than what he could have had. You got to give him there a little respect for that.
At least, right? And I think he's got 12 or so. But yeah, anything that's going to the 1 yard line, Saquon Barkley's not getting. He has 11 rushing touchdowns this year.
That's incredible.
Yeah, because Jalen Hurts has, what does he have now? Like 13 or something crazy like that. Yeah, it's crazy that something as simple as a quarterback sneak has now been turned into this tush push that it's an unstoppable thing in the NFL.
Of course, it helps when the quarterback can bench 700 pounds, right, or whatever it is.
Dude, you're not kidding. He is something else. So he has, let me see, rushing touchdowns this year. So listen, Jalen Hurts, all right, 14 rushing touchdowns this year, 15, 13, and 10. He has 52 rushing touchdowns in the last 4 seasons. And you're right, man. Like he is, and everybody said, oh, well, Jason Kelsey's retiring at center. Is he still going to be able to do the same thing? They're still doing the same thing without Jason Kelsey.
And also why other teams are like, well, why does the tush push not work for us? And I always say, because your quarterback doesn't bench 600 or 700 pounds is probably why.
And I'm a big Jaden Daniels fan, but you know he's skinny and taller. Jalen Hurts is a
different body styles altogether for sure.
sure.
They're not asking Jaden to do the tush push, I assure you.
I would not want him doing that. He may get snapped in half.
I've got some player props here I thought we'd go through real quick before we get out of here.
Yeah.
Let's see. Saquon Barkley over under 96.5 rushing yards.
This is something I've been talking about recently, which is, and it's probably not applicable in this game, but he got banged up a little bit last week, and he's been injured in a couple games where he comes back out. He leads the league in rushing. He leads the league in carries. The last thing you need is to head into the playoffs with a guy that's injured. Right? So if your whole offense this year has been, you're literally running their offense through their running back. He gets injured, it changes your entire offense.
Who's behind him? Gainwell?
Kenny Gainwell's done good in limited carries, but then behind him, Will Shipley, who's a rookie, really hasn't even played this year. Right. So to your point, if Barkley's out, you have one running back that's done something this year. I would take the under on Saquon Barkley this week. I would not use him a lot this week if I was the Eagles.
So then I guess also here 19 and a half rushing attempts.
See, man, like I hate to give bad information because every week I think that they're going to stop giving him the ball a lot. He's got 25,
Right.
26 carries. So and they don't, because after the game, everybody was like, "Oh, he's not injured." It's like, well, yeah, he is. We know he's injured, but Saquon wouldn't talk about it. Sirianni just kind of denied that he was injured. It's a good question. I would probably take the under, but I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up with 20 some carries.
Jalen Hurts at 192 and a half passing yards.
Well, so last week he threw for 290, and that was after the previous week where the passing offense struggled again. And then after the game, AJ Brown said he wasn't happy with the passing offense, and then that
Right.
all became AJ Brown and Jalen didn't like each other. So to me, it feels like that they're going to try to get the passing game going again. So I would take the over on most passing props this week.
AJ Brown 74 and a half receiving yards.
Yeah,
This will be an interesting game. He won't be going up against Benjamin St. Juice this week. It'll be Marshawn Lattimore. Little bit different challenge.
also, he was. Let me see if I have the injury report here right now. But
Okay.
he had a knee injury pop up,
Okay.
so he wasn't. I don't know if he practiced yesterday, but I know that he was limited in practice. So let me see here. AJ Brown at practice, he popped up on the injury report with a knee injury. So I mean, I don't think he's going to sit out, but still, I mean, he comes up with an injury. I would monitor this, and then if he's active once the game is going, then I would just take over on everything. But I don't know the status on it. It would concern me a little bit.
Better chance to score a touchdown, AJ Brown or Devontae Smith.
Um, if he's playing, probably AJ Brown. I don't know why I struggled with weeks for this. Why they weren't going more to a shorter slant pass game. He's been like when you think of prime Terrell Owens,
Yeah.
you get him 5 yards and slant him in, and good luck.
Watch him go. Right.
He'll pass you, he'll run through you. That's AJ Brown. He's like I don't want to say a mini To, but he's a lot. His game's a lot like To. He's big, he's physical, he breaks tackles. So like that's how I would use him. And they used him a little bit like that last week.
Buddy, this was great. I appreciate you, John. I know you had a lot of things going on and you squeezed me in today, so I really appreciate it. I will do this again sometime, and I hope you and yours have a great holiday.
Yeah, you too, Doug. Thank you. Anytime.
All right.